In this program, we interview the Swedish historian and teacher Jörgen Hedman. He's talking about an old Swedish village in Ukraine, which had earlier been occupied by the Russian army. It's now liberated. And Leif, why are we doing this interview now?
The reason why we made this video, as you said, is that the village is now liberated by the Ukrainian army. And we wanted to do a follow-up on our previous video. If you're interested in the fascinating history about how a Swedish minority came all the way from Sweden to Estonia and then to Ukraine, you're very welcome to watch our previous video. We have also made a video for our Swedish-speaking listeners. And of course, you're also very welcome to subscribe to our entire podcast project.
So let's talk to Jörgen Hedman now.
Hello, Jörgen.
Hello again.
I wonder if you can give us a brief description of Gammalsvenskby, the Swedish village in Ukraine, the history and context in short terms.
Yes, Gammalsvenskby is a village with still some Swedish inhabitants. It has been existing since the year of 1782. It is situated some 80 kilometers north of Persson on the western shore of the river Dnipro. And the listener, I think, can find it quite easily on a map. Until 1929, this village had totally some 900 Swedish inhabitants, and it was a purely Swedish village. And in 1929, almost 80% of them left for Sweden. And in a few years later, some 250 Swedes returned to Gammalsvenskby. And today, this village is a part of a larger village community called Smijivka.
Last time we spoke, it was about 6 months ago. And by that time, the Russians had been invading Gammalsvenskby and occupied it and so forth. And the army was there. And the local mayor had been kidnapped and so forth. And can you describe something about what has changed since last time we discussed these issues? Really?
Yes. Well, the major happenings in Ukraine, in this part of Ukraine, the occupied part of Ukraine, is the Russian organized referendum in Kherson on September 27th. And the district should vote in the question of belonging to the Russian Federation or not. And the villagers, they refused to take part of this referendum, and they locked themselves in their homes. But officially, it was stated that 89% of the voters here voted yes to being a part of Russia. And that was the major event of September, the month of September. The representatives of the occupied territories then some day later signed an application in Moscow to be members of the Russian Federation. And then the month of October went quite quietly on. The Russians exchanged the currency into rubles officially, and this made all savings in the local Ukrainian currency, hryvnia, worthless. But then already on November the 4th, Vladimir Putin officially announced that they were going to evacuate all the Russian inhabitants in the city of Kherson. And the Ukrainian army was pressing on towards Kherson from the north. The Russian military left the western bank of Dnipro on November the 10th. And the last words the local Russian military said to the residents here were that we are leaving now, but we are going to destroy your village totally. And the last thing the Russians then did was that they blew up the roads and destroyed all the electric power lines in the villages, and they put out landmines all along the roads and on the fields of Gammalsvenskby and the other villages on the western bank of Dnipro. And since then, actually, all the inhabitants here have been living without water supply and without electricity. And since then, there has also been a constant shelling with grenades and also using drones to bomb the village. And a few people have been killed. Several more have been injured. A lot of cattle have been killed. And today we can say that almost all the houses in the village are damaged from bombings. And there are only about 400 or 500 people left today. The others have fled, or they have moved out of the village. And the shelling has increased the latest month, and they started to evacuate the children, the school children, the hospital, and so on some 2 months ago. And today more and more people are leaving the village, and they are sleeping in the cellars, they are hiding from shells and so on. So it's a rather critical situation right now in the village.
How do they get food and water? You said there was no water supply, so how does it work really?
That has been one of the main purposes for the Society of Svenskbyborna here in Sweden to distribute some diesel plant or electrical pumps and so on to pump up water from the wells with this. And also the main purpose was also to provide the village with heating, wooden bricks and diesel and so on. So there has been a possibility to drive in with lorries for 4 or 5 months. And the problem is actually that the Russian have been targeting also these transports. So nowadays you can only use minor vehicles for these kinds of transportations. And well, since there are not that many people left, this could provide what is needed for the people. So you can say that the situation is critical, but is under control. Medication, supplies, food, wooden bricks for heating and so on is brought into the village.
Can you say something about what people are there still? The old people, children, or what age groups, or the Swedish-speaking people, are they still there? I think that there are all kinds of people left. There are elderly people who do not want to or are not able to leave. There are people nursing these elderly people who also don't want to leave them. There are very few families with small children left, but there are some children left in the village. And there are often some member in a family that has been staying behind to watch out for example their cattle and so on, and also to guard the houses against burglars and others. So in almost every family there is a connection to someone who has been staying behind in the village.
The Swedish society has been very involved, I think, with trying to, they have been helping Gammalsvenskby in various ways. I've heard, for example, that the Swedish king had decided to provide money for rebuilding a road in Gammalsvenskby, and also, as you were telling us, there is people in Sweden who came from the who have arrived from the Gammalsvenskby before they have been helping them and so forth. Can you describe the Swedish help to Gammalsvenskby?
Yes, especially through the Society of Svensbyborna, they have been raising a fund for Gammalsvenskby, and people have been very generous here in Sweden. And of course, it helped that the Swedish king, in his speech to Christmas, especially also mentioned Gammalsvenskby, and he and his family, the royal family, has been donating quite a lot of money for rebuilding the village. The village is under bomb shelling, and you can't actually start this type of renovation or rebuilding the roads and so on. But at least one thing has been planned for, and also actually is finished, and that is the building of a kind of safety point in the village with strengthened wall and Wi-Fi and water supply and so on. So there is a kind of shelter in the village where people can stay for shorter or longer times. And everybody in the village know where this is and so on. So a part of the royal money has been going to establish this safety point in the village.
It has been quite dangerous, I think, also to reach the village from the outside.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just some weeks ago, some aid helper wanted to evacuate an old grandmother with grandchildren, and their bus was shot to pieces just arriving in Gammalsvenskby, and luckily enough, the elderly lady and her grandchildren hadn't been getting on board on this minibus before it was hit, and the driver and the follower were hurt, but not deadly hurt. And in another case, there was also some aid helping transport that was hit, and it's said also in Ukraine that especially vehicles with the Red Cross marks or any kind of ambulance marks, they are goals for the Russian grenades, and people have been painting over these kind of symbols because it's safer to drive in just an ordinary vehicle.
The Swedish aid is not only going to the Swedish people, is it? It's also going to other people, so it doesn't cause any envy between various ethnic groups and so forth, neighboring villages and so on.
So it is, and it also a main purpose to get the lost inhabitants or the remaining inhabitants to work together, perhaps more than they ever did. This is a very special situation with some 20 different cultural inhabitants or inhabitants of different with different language and cultural background, and in this situation you must, I think you must treat them as one, and you must treat them all alike. As you say, it could cause rather a lot of envy otherwise, and this is not easy because some people have been coming and going, and some people have been hiding, and if you can't reach them, they will surely enough they will complain that they didn't get anything from the last transport with support and so on. And I think it was the mayor is actually not now in the village anymore. He has been seeking hospital care for minor injuries and so on. And I think it's very hard for the local authorities to keep up the work due to not knowing exactly who is staying and who has been leaving. And the situation is fluctuating for every day. So this is quite a hard job for the local authorities to support everybody in the village. But it's very necessary to do that.
The Russians who are shooting at the village and dropping bombs or using drones, where are they? Are they using artillery from somewhere, or how is it done?
Yes, they are. The front line is just the river in itself, so it's not more than 10 or 15 or 20 kilometers between the Russian lines and the villages on the western shore. And of course, the Ukrainian military also is passing through, even if they don't have any kind of high command in the village here itself. But of course, they have their positions in Berislav and also north of this district. So I think the Russians sees it as a goal or as a target to shoot at all the villages here on the western shore. And they can't hit everything, but actually they are trying. The amount of shells that have been hitting the villages is enormous. The question is, what will happen next? And I think this is a question that everybody has been asking themselves. As long as the Russian army is still holding on to the eastern bank of the river Dnipro, they are a constant threat from there. And the big question is if the Ukrainian army has the strength enough of push them out of there, of pushing them further back from there. And there has been a lot of rumors in Ukraine about the spring offensive from the Ukrainian side, but today we don't know. Vladimir Putin has been suggesting a kind of ceasefire, but this has not been taken seriously in Ukraine. It would only befriend the Russians and not the Ukrainian side. There are signs that the Russians are running out of ammunition, but still they are shelling the western shores. So actually the situation is not that easy. And there is also a lot of talking in Ukraine about drafting more men also from the Ukrainian side into the army. And some men from the village, and middle-aged men, has also been called into inspection before this kind of draft into the army. So something is going on, that is clear. And if you want to call it a spring offensive or not, that is hard to say. But I think it's something crucial will be happening in the spring. I don't see this as a soon end of the war. I think as long as Putin is still in command, I think there's actually not that kind of hope for peace. I think that Putin can't retreat from the goals he has been setting up. There are reports on quarrels between the Wagner group and the Russian army, regular army, but this is not anything that actually has anything to do with this front of the Ukrainian war. It was long ago since the Wagner troops appeared in Novakashovka and so on. They are based in Bakhmut and on other parts of the front. It's also hard to say what would happen if Vladimir Putin was removed from power, if he was replaced by another hawk. It has been a year, and I think nothing actually points out that it would be a short time until peace comes. I think we have to adjust the situation, and we have to accept the situation that this war will continue for quite a while. Since the Ukrainian authorities don't allow men under the age of 65 to leave the country, the situation is also that the women and children that have arrived here in Sweden from Gammalsvenskby and other villages, they are still parted from their husbands. And the Ukrainian authorities has been saying that they should not return, at least not during the winter. So I think it's very hard for the families there that are separated, women and children in other countries or in the western part of Ukraine, and the men still remaining in their home or in the near refugee areas in Persson, in other cities on a bit more to the west in Ukraine, and still, so to say, waiting to be drafted into the army. And that is a situation that we have to face right now.
Before this war, we were thought that Ukrainians and Russians, they were quite similar people, or some kind of or very related people. And still, like I wonder, like in history, there's often wars between very related people, maybe, that have a Cain in the Bible who killed Abel.
Yes.
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 So,
and of course, this war has been separating the two people from one another, and you have to admit that there is a hatred built up in Ukraine towards Russians, and the more Russian civil or Ukrainian civilians that are killed, I think this hatred grows towards the Russians. And in the beginning of the war, you can you could actually see no hatred or no kind of utterings of hatred towards the Russians amongst the Ukrainian people. But today, the people have been growing apart, and we have nothing in common anymore with the Russians, and their way to interpret the history, their way to see the destiny of Russia, so to say, on behalf of the Ukrainians and so on. So the feeling among the Ukrainians that it doesn't matter what language they speak in Ukraine, if they are Russian-speaking Ukrainians or Ukrainian-speaking Ukrainians or German or Swedish-speaking Ukrainians, there's a very strong feeling for Ukraine today in Ukraine, and it wasn't like that before the war started.
Can you say something about your contacts, how you get the information from Ukraine? Well,
it's still with telephone is working now, especially in this safety point. And we keep up the contact through all kind of media, and I think the safest ways are the encrypted ones, and so we can actually say that we are almost having contact every day with people living in Kherson and in Zmiyivka, and so we get the news rather quickly about what is happening.